The year 247 BC began for me at Carthage in the steady presence of my father, Hamilcar Barca. I remember Temple stone most clearly. The world soft and unhurried around me, the days unfolding slowly. You need not follow every word that follows. Let your eyes close whenever they wish and simply rest here with me as the story unfolds. The air in those early mornings held a warmth that seemed to rise from the very ground, carrying the salt of the Mediterranean coast and the faint, dry scent of cedar oil. My brothers, Hasdrubal and Mago, were small then, their footsteps light on the packed earth as they ran through the courtyards where the light fell in wide, golden pools. We were named in the shadow of the great temples, where the stone walls held the heat of the day long after the sun had dipped below the horizon. The temple of Baal Hammon stood as a silent witness to our growing, its columns rising like the trunks of ancient trees that had seen centuries pass without hurry. I recall the texture of the rough, hewn blocks under my small hands, cool and solid against the warm skin of my palm. The incense burned in slow, rhythmic puffs, sending thin ribbons of smoke upward to vanish into the clear blue sky. There was no rush in those days, no urgency to move beyond the boundaries of the city walls, or hid live, or the reach of the sea light that shimmered on the water. The sound of the waves lapping against the shore was a constant companion, a gentle rhythm that marked the passing of hours without the need for clocks or bells. It was a sound that settled deep within the chest, slowing the breath and calming the mind before the day had truly begun. My father moved through these spaces with a quiet confidence. His presence felt more than seen, a steady anchor in the shifting tides of life. He would walk the markets where the air smelled of dried herbs and fresh fish, his eyes scanning the crowds with a calm that belied the weight of his thoughts. I followed him often, my small hand tucked securely within his, learning the language of the streets through the rhythm of his steps. The people spoke in low tones, their voices blending with the clatter of carts and the cry of gulls overhead. It was a world of simple sensations, of textures and smells and sounds that painted the landscape of my childhood in broad, unhurried strokes. The silence of the evening was particularly deep, broken only by the crackle of the hearth fire and the distant murmur of the sea. In those moments, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next dawn to bring new light and new possibilities. The dust motes danced in the shafts of light that filtered through the high windows, moving in slow, deliberate patterns that mirrored the flow of time itself. A single oil lamp burned with a steady flame, casting long, wavering shadows against the walls that seemed to stretch and contract with the rhythm of the night. The texture of the woven rugs underfoot was soft and worn, their geometric patterns echoing the designs found on the city walls and the pottery of the local artisans. It was a life of quiet observation, of watching the world unfold without the need to intervene or to force change. The mind was free to wander through the corridors of memory and imagination, exploring the endless possibilities that lay just beyond the horizon. In this quiet space, the heavy burden of future conflicts had not yet settled upon the shoulders of the child. The oath that would later define a life of struggle was still a distant whisper, a faint echo of a promise yet to be made. The focus remained on the immediate, on the feel of the warm air against the skin and the sight of the sea light dancing on the water. The world was vast and full of wonder, a place where every stone and every leaf held a story waiting to be discovered. The years passed slowly, measured not by the battles fought or the lands conquered, but by the changing of the seasons and the growth of the children who walked the streets of Carthage. The memory of those early days remains clear, a foundation of stillness upon which the rest of the life was built. It was a time of peace, of simple joys, and of a quiet confidence that the future would unfold in its own good time. The scent of dried lavender and cedar oil hung heavy in the room, a reminder of the markets outside and the life that continued beyond the walls. A small clay model of an elephant stood silent on a wooden table, its trunk raised as if ready to charge, yet frozen in a moment of eternal stillness. The texture of the clay was smooth, where the artist had polished it with a wet cloth, capturing the essence of the great beast in a form that was both powerful and delicate. Nearby, a scroll of papyrus lay unrolled, its edges worn from frequent handling and careful study. The ink on the page was dark and rich, depicting the winding paths of a mountain range with meticulous detail. The silence was deep and comforting, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire in the hearth. Outside the window, the Mediterranean Sea stretched out under a pale moon, its surface shimmering with a gentle rhythm that seemed to slow the passage of time itself. The memory of that day is as sharp as the blade of a sword. I was 9 years old, live, standing in the shadow of the great temples of Carthage, the air thick with the scent of incense and the murmur of the crowd. My father, Hamilcar Barca, stood before the altar of Baal, his face a mask of solemn resolve. The Romans had taken our lands in Sicily, our ships, our pride. The peace we signed was not a peace of friendship, but a chain of iron that bound us to their will. Hamilcar did not speak of war then, not openly, but his eyes held a fire that burned hotter than the summer sun. He took my hand, his grip firm and unyielding, and led me to the altar. The priests chanted, their voices low and rhythmic, but I heard only the pounding of my own heart. Swear, my father whispered, his voice rough with a grief he kept hidden from the world. He guided my small hand to rest upon the cold stone of the altar. The surface was smooth and worn, polished by centuries of hands seeking favor or offering prayers to the gods. The stone felt heavy, absorbing the heat of my palm and the weight of the promise I was about to make. I looked up at the statue of Baal Hammon, carved from dark basalt that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The features were stern, the eyes fixed on a horizon that stretched far beyond the city walls, beyond the sea, to the lands of our enemies. I felt the gaze of the priests upon me, a collective pressure that pressed down on my shoulders, yet I did not flinch. The air inside the sanctuary was cool and still, filled with the faint, dry scent of burning cedar and myrrh that clung to the folds of their robes. Dust motes danced slowly in the beams of sunlight that pierced the darkness, moving with a gentle and unhurried rhythm that mocked the chaos waiting outside. I placed my hand flat against the stone and spoke the words that would bind my life to a single purpose. I swore to maintain a stance of revanchism against Rome for the rest of my days. The vow was not a whisper, but a declaration that echoed in the hollow space of the temple. It was a pledge to seek vengeance for the humiliation of our people, to never accept the chain of iron that held us. This promise bound me to a destiny of conflict and defined the purpose of my entire existence from that day forward. The promise was made with the weight of a father's hope and a nation's desire for vengeance. It was a vow that would guide my actions when I later assumed the rank of Commander-in-Chief of the Army. My service in this high office began in 221 BC and continued until the final defeat in 202 BC. The years between the oath and my rise to power were filled with preparation and the honing of my strategic mind. I traveled with my father to Spain, where he sought to rebuild our strength on the Iberian Peninsula. The young man observed the administration of new territories and the management of mercenary armies from a very early age. I learned how to negotiate with local tribes and how to maintain order among diverse and often unruly forces. These experiences in Spain were crucial in shaping my understanding of logistics and the challenges of campaigning far from home. The landscape of the Iberian coast provided a stark contrast to the arid plains of North Africa. I saw the mountains and the rivers that would later become the stages for my most famous military campaigns. The education I received was not confined to books or temples, but included the harsh realities of frontier life. I developed a reputation for physical endurance and mental resilience that would serve me well in the years to come. My ability to adapt to different environments and cultures set me apart from my contemporaries. The early life of my youth was a continuous process of learning and observation under the watchful eye of my father. I absorbed the lessons of failure and the necessity of resilience with a quiet and steady determination. The city of my birth remained a constant reference point, a symbol of the glory I sought to restore. Every step I took in my youth was a preparation for the great struggle that lay ahead. The seeds of my future conquests were sown in the soil of Carthage and watered by the tears of a defeated people. I grew into a man who carried the hopes of an empire on my shoulders with a calm and focused demeanor. The oath I took as a boy became the driving force behind my every decision and every movement. It was a commitment that transcended personal ambition and became a matter of national survival. The world of the Mediterranean was changing rapidly, and I was being forged to meet these challenges. My early years were marked by a sense of destiny that few could claim or understand. I moved through the world with a purpose that was clear and unwavering in its direction. The path I chose was difficult and fraught with danger, yet I walked it without hesitation or doubt. The memory of my father's guidance and the sacred promise I made remained with me always. These early influences created a leader who was both feared and respected by friend and foe alike. The foundation of my character was laid in the quiet moments of childhood and the solemn rituals of my youth. The light in the temple of Bao Hammond filtered through the high stone windows, casting long and steady shadows across the polished floor. The air inside was cool and still, filled with the faint scent of burning cedar and myrrh. A large statue of the deity stood in the center, carved from dark basalt with intricate details that caught the dim light. The surface of the stone was smooth to the touch, worn by centuries of hands seeking guidance or offering prayers. Dust motes danced slowly in the beams of sunlight that pierced the darkness, moving with a gentle and unhurried rhythm. The silence of the sanctuary was profound, broken only by the soft rustle of a priest's robe or the distant sound of the wind outside. It was a place of deep reflection where the young boy had made his solemn vow to the gods. The atmosphere remained heavy with the weight of history and the seriousness of the promise that had been spoken. The stone walls seemed to hold the echoes of that moment, preserving the memory of the oath for generations to come. The quiet dignity of the space offered a sense of permanence and stability in a world that was often chaotic and uncertain. I remember the texture of the stone beneath my fingers, the coolness that seeped into my skin, a physical anchor for a promise that would last a lifetime. The priests stood in a semicircle, their faces hidden in the shadows of their deep hoods, watching the boy who would become the scourge of Rome. They did not speak, for the vow required no witnesses other than the gods and the Father who stood beside me. My father's hand rested on my shoulder, a heavy weight that grounded me, keeping me steady as the words left my lips. He did not smile, for there was no joy in this moment, only the grim necessity of survival. The temple was a fortress of memory, a place where the past and the future converged in the present moment. The dust of the Pyrenees still feels between my fingers, a fine red grit that never quite washes away. It clings to the skin like a second memory, reminding me of the long march that began where the Mediterranean meets the Atlantic. The air there was cool and sharp, carrying the scent of wet stone and wild thyme that grew in the crevices of the mountains. We moved slowly, a river of men and beasts, carving a path through the green valleys of the north. My brothers walked beside me, their faces set in the same grim determination that had been carved into our father's face before he died. Hasdrubal led the cavalry, his movements fluid and precise, while Mago brought up the rear, ensuring no straggler was left behind in the dark. The landscape shifted from the humid warmth of the coast to the rugged heights of the mountains, where the wind howled through the passes like a mourning woman. Live. We carried the weight of Carthage on our shoulders, a burden of gold and iron and unfulfilled promises. The silver mines of the south had filled our coffers, but they had also drawn the gaze of our enemies across the sea. Rome watched us from afar, their spies moving through the markets of Spain like shadows in the night. They saw our strength and felt the tremor of their own foundations shaking. The city of Saguntum stood as a stone wall between our ambitions and their security, a city that claimed the protection of the Republic while our banners flew over the surrounding hills. The siege of that city was a long and grinding affair, a test of patience that stretched over many months. The sun beat down on the walls, baking the earth until it cracked, while the defenders inside hoarded their water and watched our lines with weary eyes. We brought engines of war that groaned under the strain of their own weight, wooden beasts that spat fire and stone at the stone faces of the city. The noise was constant, a rhythmic pounding that became the heartbeat of the camp, a sound that eventually silenced the birds in the trees. When the walls finally fell, the silence that followed was heavier than the noise, a heavy blanket that covered the blood and the dust It was the spark that lit the fire of a war that would consume the known world for 17 years. The Roman legions gathered their strength, their ships filling the harbors, their voices rising in a chorus of anger and fear. They knew that we would not stop there, that the march had only just begun. We prepared to leave the familiar shores of Spain, to turn our backs on the silver mines and the loyal allies we had built over years of careful planning. The decision to cross the mountains was not made in a moment of madness, but in the quiet hours of the night, when the maps were spread out on the rough wooden tables. The road was dangerous, filled with bandits and treacherous paths, but it was the only way to strike at the heart of their power before they could fully mobilize. The elephants were loaded onto the ships first, their great trunks curling in the wind live as they were ferried across the narrow strait. Their low rumble was a sound that vibrated through the hull of the ship, a reminder of the strange and terrifying power we carried with us. The journey across the sea was short, but the journey into the unknown would take months of hard walking and hard fighting. We left the city of New Carthage behind, a place of salt and fish and the smell of drying nets, and turned our faces toward the north. The Pyrenees rose before us like a wall of granite, their peaks lost in the clouds, a barrier that had stopped armies before us. But we were not just an army. We were a force of will, driven by a vow made by a boy standing before an altar of Baal. The first days of the ascent were difficult, the path narrow and steep, forcing the men to climb on their hands and knees. The cold bit at our skin, a sharp pain that woke us from the numbness of the long march. Snow began to fall, soft and silent at first, then heavy and blinding, covering the path in a white shroud. The elephants struggled, their feet slipping on the ice, their tusks scraping against the rock as they tried to find purchase. We built fires to keep them warm, the smoke curling up into the gray sky, a beacon for those who followed behind. The sound of the wind was constant, a howling that drowned out the voices of the men, forcing them to shout to be heard. We ate the horses that could not make it, the meat tough and stringy, but it kept the cold from claiming us. The nights were the hardest, the darkness absolute, broken only by the flicker of torches and the glow of the embers. We slept in the snow, wrapped in cloaks that had become stiff with ice, listening to the groans of the beasts and the whispers of the dying. The mountain did not care for our plans or our oaths. It only cared for the strength of those who tried to cross it. It was a test of endurance that stripped away the pretense of civilization, leaving only the raw instinct to survive. The descent into Gaul was a relief, a sudden drop into the warmth of the valley below. The air changed, becoming thick and humid, smelling of wet leaves and decay. The rivers were swollen with the meltwater, rushing down from the peaks with a roar that echoed in the canyons. We crossed them on makeshift rafts, the water cold enough to numb the legs, the current strong enough to sweep a man away. The Gauls watched us from the hills, their faces painted in red and blue, their spears held high in a mixture of curiosity and fear. They had heard the stories of the men who crossed the mountains with elephants, and they did not know whether to welcome us or to fight us. Some tribes offered us food and shelter, their hands open in a gesture of peace, while others gathered in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. We moved through their lands like a storm, taking what we needed and leaving what we could not carry. The pace was relentless, the days blending into one another in a blur of mud and sweat. We were no longer the army of Carthage. We were a people of the road, bound together by the shared hardship of the journey. The land was vast and unfamiliar, a tapestry of forests and fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. The sky was different here, lower and heavier, pressing down on the shoulders of the men. The stars at night were the same, but the constellations seemed to shift, rearranging themselves in patterns that made no sense to our eyes. We followed the rivers, using them as guides through the wilderness, their winding paths leading us deeper into the heart of the enemy's territory. The Rhone was a wide and angry river, its waters churning with the force of the rain that had fallen in the north. We built a bridge of boats to cross it, the wood creaking under the weight of the elephants as they lumbered across. The noise of the crossing was a symphony of wood and water and animal, a sound that would be remembered by the men who made it. Once across, the land opened up a wide plain that stretched toward the horizon, dotted with the smoke of distant villages. The march continued, the rhythm of the feet and the hooves becoming a hypnotic beat that lulled the mind into a state of trance. The days were long and the nights were short, the sun rising and setting with a speed that seemed to mock our exhaustion. We were moving faster than the Romans expected, faster than they could gather their forces to stop us. The element of surprise was our greatest weapon, a blade that we had sharpened in the silence of. The silence here is heavy, different from the silence of the battlefield before the charge. It is a quiet that settles in the bones, a stillness that follows the storm. I sit by the fire, the heat fading slowly, much like the embers of a great empire that once burned bright across the known world. The wind whispers through the olive trees of Bithynia, carrying the scent of salt and distant rain. It is a gentle sound, far removed from the roar of elephants and the clash of bronze on iron. In this quiet, the memories do not fade. They simply settle, layer upon layer, like the dust of the Alps or the sand of the Italian plains. I close my eyes, and the darkness is not empty. It is filled with the faces of men who marched with me, the weight of the oath I took as a boy, and the long, winding road that led me from Carthage to the edge of the world and back again. There is no regret in this quiet, only the slow, rhythmic breathing of a life fully lived, a life that sought to reshape the map of the earth. The path to the mountains began in the heat of Spain, where the sun beat down on the dust and the dry grass crackled underfoot. We left the warmth behind, trading the golden fields for the gray stone and the biting cold of the north. The march through Gaul was a long, slow drag of feet and will, a river of men and beasts winding through forests that seemed to stretch forever. I watched the trees change, their leaves turning from green to gold to bare, skeletal branches reaching into a sky that grew lighter and colder with every day. The men grew tired, their boots worn thin, their spirits tested by the constant rain and the suspicion of the tribes we passed. Yet there was a rhythm to it, a steady cadence of movement that kept the fear at bay. We were a single organism, moving with a purpose that transcended the individual ache in every muscle. The logistics of feeding such a host were a constant calculation, a mental map of grain stores and river crossings that never left my mind. Then came the mountains, rising like a wall of white against the horizon. They were not the gentle hills of home, but jagged peaks that pierced the sky, their summits lost in clouds that never seemed to move. The air grew thin, making every breath a labor, and the cold began to seep through the layers of wool and leather that covered our skin. The path was narrow, a ribbon of dirt, dirt clinging to the side of a cliff with a sheer drop on one side and a wall of ice on the other. We moved slowly, carefully, placing each foot with precision, for a single slip meant a fall into the abyss. The elephants, those great beasts of burden and war, struggled the most, their thick hides offering little protection against the freezing wind. I walked among them, patting their rough skin, speaking in low tones to keep them calm. Their eyes were wide with fear, but they trusted me, and that trust was the only thing that kept them moving forward. The snow was deep and powdery, swallowing our tracks as soon as we made them. It fell in sheets, blinding us and muffling the sound of our footsteps until the world seemed to have gone silent. We huddled together in the caves and crevices we found, sharing our body heat and the little food we had left. The nights were long and dark, filled with the howling of the wind and the groans of the dying animals. I remember the smell of the snow, a clean, sharp scent that burned the nose, mixed with the odor of unwashed bodies and fear. It was a harsh existence, stripped of all comfort, reduced to the simple need to survive another hour, another day. The men spoke little, their voices hoarse from the cold, their eyes fixed on the path ahead. There was no room for complaint, only the shared determination to reach the other side. One night, as the wind screamed around our makeshift shelter, I watched the stars through a break in the clouds. They were brilliant and cold, a vast canopy of light that seemed to stretch across the entire universe. In that moment, the scale of our journey became clear, a tiny speck of life moving against the backdrop of eternity. It was a humbling thought, but it also brought a strange sense of peace. We were small, yes, but we were moving. We were alive. There I did live. And we were doing something that had never been done before. The mountain did not care for our struggles, but we cared for each other, and that care was enough to keep us going. The descent was as dangerous as the ascent, perhaps more so. The ice had formed a smooth, treacherous layer over the rocks, making every step a gamble. We had to clear the path, breaking through the ice with our hands and tools, carving a way for the elephants to follow. It took days of relentless work, the men exhausted but driven by the promise of the valley below. The air grew warmer as we descended, the snow giving way to rock, and then to sparse vegetation. The sound of running water returned, a gentle murmur that grew into a roar as we approached the rivers of the Italian plain. Live. The men cheered when they saw the first signs of life, the green grass and the warm sun that waited for them on the other side. It was a victory not of swords, but of endurance, a testament to the human spirit's ability to adapt and overcome. A single oil lamp burned with a steady flame, casting long shadows against the rough-hewn walls of the command tent. The light flickered in the draft, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the still air. On a wooden table lay a scroll of papyrus, its edges worn from frequent handling and careful study. The ink on the page was dark and rich, depicting the winding paths of a mountain range with meticulous detail. Nearby, a small clay model of an elephant stood silent, its trunk raised as if ready to charge. The texture of the clay was smooth, where the artist had polished it with a wet cloth. The scent of cedar oil and dried herbs hung heavy in the room, a reminder of the markets outside. A woven rug covered the floor, its geometric patterns echoing the designs found on the city walls. The silence was deep and comforting, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire in the hearth. Outside the window, the Mediterranean Sea stretched out under a pale moon, its surface shimmering with a gentle rhythm. The waves lapped against the shore with a sound that seemed to slow the passage of time itself. In this quiet space, the mind could wander freely through the corridors of memory and imagination. The artifacts of a life lived in service to a grand vision sat in stillness, waiting for the next chapter to begin. We entered Italy not as conquerors, but as survivors. Our ranks thinned, but our resolve unbroken. The land was green and fertile, a stark contrast to the white desolation we had just left behind. The people looked at us with a mixture of fear and wonder, for we were a strange sight, a band of men and beasts emerging from the clouds. The war that followed was a dance of strategy and terrain, a game of chess played with armies instead of pieces. I used the landscape to my advantage, forcing the Romans into positions where their numbers meant little. The battles were brutal and decisive, reshaping the political map of the Mediterranean for a generation. Yet the memory of the crossing remained the most vivid, the moment where the impossible became real. It was a feat of engineering and, well, that would be studied for centuries, a testament to what can be achieved when a leader and his men move as one. The legacy of that journey is not in the victories won or the cities taken, but in the sheer audacity of the act. It showed that the mind can conquer the elements, that a plan can be forged in the fires of adversity and carried to completion. The men who walked that path were changed, hardened by the cold and the fear, but also strengthened by the shared experience. They knew that no obstacle was too great, no mountain too high, if they moved together with purpose. This knowledge stayed with them, a quiet confidence that guided them live through the years of conflict that followed. The story of the march into Gaul and live. The crossing of the Alps became a legend, retold in schools and public forums, inspiring generations of leaders and dreamers. It was a reminder that human ambition is a powerful force, capable of reshaping the world. The historical records preserve the details of these campaigns through the accounts of ancient historians, but the true essence of the journey is felt in the silence of the mountains. It is in the stillness of the snow and the sound of the wind that the memory lives on. Modern archaeology has uncovered artifacts that corroborate the written records, coins, and weapons found in the valleys of Italy and Spain. The snow fell without sound, a white curtain that swallowed the world before the first step was taken. We stood at the edge of the known map where the stone turned to ice, and the air grew thin enough to steal the breath from a man's lungs. It was a place where the gods seemed to have forgotten their work, leaving only the raw, unyielding granite of the mountains. My soldiers looked up at the peaks with eyes that held both fear and a strange, hardened wonder. They were men of the South, born to the heat of the African plains and the salt of the Mediterranean. Yet here they were, shivering in wool and leather. The cold was not merely a temperature, it was a physical weight that pressed against the chest and turned the blood to slush in the veins. Live. We moved forward because there was no other direction, a line of dust and hope winding up the spine of the world. The path was narrow, cut into the side of a cliff that dropped away into a mist soap. Deep it might have been the underworld itself. One wrong step, one slip on the ice, and a man would vanish without a sound, swallowed by the eternal silence of the rocks. The elephants, those great beasts of war, groaned as they pushed their massive weight against the gradient. Their skin was wrinkled with frost, their trunks raised to catch the biting wind. They did not understand the politics of Rome or the oaths sworn in Carthage. They only knew the cold and the pain in their feet. We had to clear the path with torches and pickaxes, melting the snow to create a foothold for their heavy feet. The firelight danced on the white walls of the valley, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to reach out and grab at the ankles of the marching men. We camped in the high passes, where the wind howled like a wounded animal. The nights were long and dark, filled with the sounds of settling ice and the distant rumble of avalanches that shook the ground beneath our tents. Men huddled together for warmth, sharing what little food they had left, their voices low and steady in the face of the elements. There was no room for complaint, only a shared determination to survive the night. The cold seeped into the bones, a deep ache that would remain long after the warmth of the fire returned. I walked among them, checking the lines, feeling the pulse of the army in the rhythm of their breathing. They were tired, yes, but they were not broken. The spirit of the Barca family ran through them, a stubborn fire that refused to be extinguished by the ice. The descent into Italy was a slow, agonizing process that took days of careful navigation. The snow gave way to rock, then to mud, and finally to the green grass of the Po Valley. It was a strange sensation to feel the earth soften beneath the feet. After so many weeks of hard, frozen ground, the air grew warmer, carrying the scent of wet soil and growing things, a stark contrast to the sterile smell of the high peaks. The men cheered as they saw the first signs of civilization, the smoke rising from distant villages and the glint of sunlight on the river below. It was a victory, not of battle, but of endurance. We had crossed the barrier that the Romans believed was impassable, a feat that would echo through the ages. The war in Italy began not with a clash of armies, but with a careful dance of movement and deception. We moved through the countryside, avoiding the main roads where the Roman legions waited in force. The landscape was our ally, the rolling hills and dense forests providing cover for our troops. We struck when they least expected it, appearing from the mist like ghosts, then vanishing before they could form a proper line. The Romans were disciplined, trained to fight in tight formations on open ground, but they had no answer for an enemy that refused to stand still. Every victory was a lesson in the power of adaptability, in the ability to think faster than the enemy could react. The battle at Trebia was a cold affair, fought in the snow and the freezing river that ran through the valley. We lured the Romans into the water, their armor heavy with ice, their movements slow and clumsy. Then we struck from the flanks, our cavalry sweeping around to cut off their retreat. The river ran red, the water churning with the bodies of men and horses. It was a brutal, efficient slaughter that left the Roman army in ruins. The survivors fled in disarray, their confidence shattered by the sheer audacity of our tactics. We did not celebrate with loud cries or wild dances. We simply gathered our dead and prepared for the next move. The silence after the battle was heavier than the snow, a testament to the cost of war. The next year brought the summer heat and the great battle at Lake Trasimene. The sun beat down on the land, turning the dust to powder and the air to a shimmering haze. We hid our army in the hills that overlooked the narrow pass where the Roman legions marched. The fog that morning was thick, a white blanket that hid our presence until the last possible moment. When the signal was given, we poured down from the heights surrounding the enemy on all sides. The Romans were trapped, their formation compressed into a tight knot where the swords could not swing freely. The battle was a chaotic melee, a tangle of bronze and leather that ended in a decisive victory. The lake itself seemed to hold its breath, the water still and dark, reflecting the smoke rising from the burning camp. Cannae was the masterpiece, the moment where strategy and execution merged into a single, perfect instrument of war. The ground was dry and cracked, the sun relentless in its heat. The Roman army was vast, a sea of red and gold that stretched across the plain. They believed their numbers would crush us, that their sheer mass would be enough to win the day. We let them push us back, drawing them deeper into the trap we had set. Then, with a signal that was barely a whisper, the cavalry on the wings swept around to close the circle. The Roman army was encircled, cut off from retreat or reinforcement. Live. The fighting was brutal and close, a grinding pressure that lasted for hours. When it was over, the plain was littered with the fallen, a graveyard of Roman ambition. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of the wind moving through the grass. The years that followed were a long, slow grind of attrition. We held the south of Italy, a kingdom within a kingdom, while the Romans regrouped and rebuilt. The land was fertile, the people weary of the constant war, yet they did not rise up in our favor as we had hoped. The political landscape was complex, a web of alliances and betrayals that shifted with the wind. We had to rely on our own resources, on the loyalty of the troops who had followed us across the mountains. The brothers Hasdrubal and Mago moved in the shadows. There I did live, keeping the pressure on the enemy from other fronts. They were the pillars of the Barcid strategy, men who understood the weight of the name they carried. The Roman state was resilient, a machine that could absorb defeat and keep moving forward. They changed their tactics, avoiding direct battles and cutting off our supply lines. They built walls and fortifications, slowly squeezing the life out of our position. The war became a contest of patience, a test of who could endure the longest. We fought in Spain and Africa, spreading our forces thin across the Mediterranean. The conflicts were fierce, the stakes higher than ever before. The balance of power shifted with every battle, every lost city, every broken alliance. The history of these years is written in the scars of the land, in the ruins of forts, and the buried weapons of the fallen. Modern archaeology has uncovered coins and tools that tell the story of these campaigns, silent witnesses to the struggle. The artifacts are small, unassuming things, yet they carry the weight of the events that shaped the ancient world. They remind us that the battles were fought by real men, with real fears and real hopes. The study of these objects adds a layer of depth to the written records. Grounding the legend in the physical reality of the past. Scholars debate the long-term consequences of the war, analyzing how it changed the Roman Republic forever. Some say it forced them to build a new kind of army, stronger and more flexible. Others argue that it only strengthened their resolve, turning a city-state into an empire. The truth lies somewhere in the middle, in the complex interplay of cause and effect that defines human history. The memory of the Italian campaigns is a tapestry of triumph and tragedy woven from the threads of human will and natural obstacle. It is a story of a man who dared to challenge the greatest power of his time, who walked where no army had walked before. The legacy of those years is not just in the battles won or lost, but in the way they reshaped the map of the world. Live. The name of Hannibal became a symbol of resistance, a reminder that even the strongest empire can be challenged. The quiet study of these events allows us to appreciate the full scope of what was achieved, the sheer magnitude of the effort required to cross the Alps and hold Italy for so long. A small stone bowl sits on the table before me, worn smooth by centuries of handling. It is made of a dark, porous rock, perhaps basalt or basaltic tuff, with a rim that has been chipped by time. Inside, the surface is stained with the residue of oil and grain, a ghost of the meals shared in the campfires of the past. The texture is rough under the fingertips, a contrast to the smooth, cool skin of the stone. It holds the memory of 1,000 hands, each one gripping it for a moment before passing it on. The bowl is simple, unadorned, yet it speaks of the daily life of the soldier, the mundane acts that sustained the great campaigns. It is a vessel of survival, a humble object that witnessed the rise and fall. The silence here is heavy, different from the silence of the battlefield before the charge. It is a quiet that settles in the bones, a stillness that follows the storm. I sit by the fire, the heat fading slowly, much like the embers of a great empire that once burned bright across the known world. I did live. The wind whispers through the olive trees of Bithynia, carrying the scent of salt and distant rain. It is a gentle sound, far removed from the roar of elephants and the clash of bronze on iron. In this quiet, the memories do not fade. They simply settle, layer upon layer, like the dust of the Alps or the sand of the Italian plains. I close my eyes, and the darkness is not empty. It is filled with the faces of men who marched with me, the weight of the oath I took as a boy, and the long, winding road that led me from Carthage to the edge of the world and back again. There is no regret in this quiet, only the slow, rhythmic breathing of a life fully lived, a life that sought to reshape the map of the earth. The path of command is a lonely road paved with decisions that no one else can make. I learned early that the mind must become a fortress, sealed against the noise of the crowd. While others sought the comfort of soft beds and warm hearths, I found my rest in the hard ground of the tent. The air inside was thin and cold, smelling of damp wool and the leather of armor. I rose before the sun, when the world was still wrapped in a deep, gray mist. My feet touched the frozen earth, a shock that woke the body and sharpened the senses. There was no time for hesitation. The day began with the inspection of the camp, the checking of every spear and every horse. I moved through the rows of men, seeing the fear in their eyes, but also the trust. They looked to me for direction, for a sign that the impossible was possible. I gave them nothing but a steady gaze and a clear order. The weight of their survival rested on my shoulders, a burden that never lifted. Strategy required a mind that could see the landscape as a living thing. I did not look at the mountains as barriers, but as puzzles waiting to be solved. The snow-covered peaks of the Alps were not walls, but gates. The men who walked beside me saw only death in the white silence. I saw a path, a way through the chaos. We moved with a precision that seemed to defy the logic of the world. The horses slipped on the ice, their hooves finding purchase on the jagged rocks. The elephants struggled, their massive bodies swaying in the wind. I walked among them, live, my hand on the rough hide of the largest beast, feeling the heat of its breath in the freezing air. It was a journey of endurance, a test of will against the elements. The cold bit into the skin, but the mind remained warm with purpose. We crossed the passes, leaving the familiar world behind for the unknown lands of Italy. The surprise of our arrival was the first stroke of the plan. The Romans expected us to come by sea, to follow the easy roads. Instead, we came from the sky, descending from the heights like a storm. This ability to mislead became the core of my method. I learned to show the enemy what they wanted to see, while hiding the true intent to the untrained eye. My movements looked like chaos, a scattered retreat, or a confused advance. But beneath the surface, every step was calculated. The deception was a form of art, a way to manipulate the perception of those who stood against me. I understood that the greatest victories were won before the first sword was drawn. The battle was fought in the mind of the opponent, in the confusion that I sowed with every feint and every false flag. The Roman generals, proud and rigid, could not comprehend a mind that flowed like water. Live. They tried to meet me on the field of honor, but I was never there. I was in the hills, in the valleys, in the shadows of the forests. I struck when they were weakest, when their lines were stretched thin by their own arrogance. The isolation of command was not just physical, but deeply personal. I stood alone at the center of a web of alliances, bound by promises and shared danger. My army was a tapestry of different peoples, speaking different tongues, following different gods. Live. There were Numidians with their swift horses, Iberians with their curved swords, and Gauls with their fierce cries. Each group had its own needs, its own fears. I had to weave them together into a single force, a single will. This required a constant vigilance, a watchfulness that never slept. I listened to the whispers of the scouts, the reports of the spies, the complaints of the veterans. I absorbed it all, filtering the noise to find the truth. The trust I built was fragile, easily broken by a single mistake. Yet, I forged bonds that held firm against the pressure of years. These men fought for me, not for a king or a distant senate, there I did live, but for the man who shared their hunger and their cold. Live. The political world of Carthage offered little support, only suspicion. The senators in the distant city watched my campaigns with a mixture of hope and fear. They questioned my presence in Italy, wondering why I did not return with the spoils of victory. They did not understand that that the war was not about land, but about the spirit of the people. My rivals within the city saw my success as a threat to their own power. Live, they whispered in the forums, plotting to undermine my authority. I felt the sting of their betrayal, the coldness of their silence when I needed aid. The letters from home were few and full of doubt. They spoke of peace, of compromise, of the need to end the struggle. But I knew that peace without honor was no peace at all. The oath I took as a boy burned in my chest, a fire that could not be extinguished by the cold winds of politics. I continued to fight, to maneuver, to survive, despite the lack of support from my own people. The years in Italy were a long, slow march of endurance. The seasons changed. The snow melted and returned, but the war remained. I lived in the tents, ate the simple rations, and slept on the hard ground. My body grew lean and tough, stripped of the softness of luxury. I rarely sought comfort, for comfort was a distraction from the mission. The men saw my austerity and followed my example. We became a single organism, moving with a shared rhythm. The isolation of the leader was the price of this unity. I could not share the burden with anyone, for the final decision was always mine alone. The weight of the oath, the weight of the army, the weight of the future, all pressed down on me. Yet there was a strange peace in this solitude. It was the peace of the mountain peak, where the air is thin and the view is clear. I saw the world as it was, without the filter of desire or fear. The legacy of these years is etched in the history of the world. The strategies I devised, the alliances I forged, the battles I won and lost, all form a part of the great tapestry of human conflict. I did not seek glory for its own sake. I sought to fulfill a promise, to avenge a wrong, to show that the will of one man could move the tides of history. The Romans eventually crushed the power of Carthage, but they could not break the spirit of the man who led them. I lived to see the end of my own city, to watch the smoke rise from the temples of my ancestors. But I also lived to see the fear in the eyes of the Romans, if the realization that they were not invincible. That fear was the true victory, the lasting mark of my life. The story of my campaigns is a reminder that the human spirit can endure the most extreme conditions. It is a testament to the power of vision, of the ability to see a path where others see only a wall. A small wooden bowl sits on the table beside me, carved from the olive tree that grows outside the window. The grain of the wood is dark and twisted, telling the story of years of wind and sun. The surface is smooth, worn by the touch of many. The fire burns low now, casting long shadows that stretch across the stone floor like the fingers of a forgotten clock. The air in this room is still, heavy with the scent of dried herbs and the faint, metallic tang of old rain. I watch the smoke curl upward, dissolving into the darkness above, much like the armies I once led across mountains and rivers. The noise of the world has finally faded, leaving only the rhythmic ticking of a small wooden clock on the wall. Its pendulum swings with a steady, hypnotic motion, marking the passage of time in a way that feels both endless and fleeting. The wood of the clock is dark, polished smooth by years of touch, and the glass face reflects the dying embers of the hearth. Outside, the wind moves through the reeds near the coast, a soft, rustling sound that mimics the breathing of a sleeping giant. This quiet is different from the silence of the battlefield, live, where the air held the tension of a drawn bowstring. Here, there is no anticipation of violence, only the slow, deliberate unraveling of a long and complex life. The memories of those final years are not sharp or painful, but rather soft and distant, like a painting seen through a mist. I recall the courts where I sought refuge, places filled with marble columns, and the sound of water flowing in hidden fountains. The people there spoke of me with a mixture of fear and curiosity, their eyes following my every move, as if I were a ghost from a distant past. They did not understand that I was simply a man trying to find a place where the weight of an oath could be set down. The politics of these foreign lands were intricate and delicate, woven from threads of ambition and suspicion. I moved through them with the same caution. I used to navigate the passes of the Alps, watching for the slightest shift in the wind. The Seleucid court was vast and noisy, a place where gold and silk covered the harsh realities of power struggles. I served as an advisor, offering strategies that were born from decades of hard-won experience, yet I often felt like an outsider looking in. The language of these men was different, their customs strange, but the underlying currents of human nature remained the same. Greed, fear, and the desire for glory drove them, just as they drove the senators in Rome. I saw the same patterns repeating, the same cycles of rise and fall that had played out in Carthage. It was a lesson I had learned early, that empires are built on sand and can be washed away by the tide of time. The years in Bithynia were quieter, marked by the slow rhythm of the sea and the gentle movement of the clouds. I spent my days walking along the shore, watching the waves crash against the rocks with a sound that was both violent and soothing. The salt spray coated my skin, a familiar sensation that reminded me of the long voyages across the Mediterranean. In those moments, the burden of leadership felt lighter, as if the sea had absorbed some of the weight I had carried for so long. I watched the fishermen pull in their nets, their movements practiced and efficient, a stark contrast to the chaotic maneuvers of war. There was a simplicity in their lives that I found deeply comforting, a rhythm that was dictated by the sun and the moon rather than the whims of kings. The small village where I stayed was a place of modest dwellings and narrow streets filled with the smell of baking bread and roasting fish. The people there did not know my name, or if they did, they treated me as just another traveler seeking shelter from the wind. This anonymity was a gift, a chance to exist without the constant scrutiny that had followed me for decades. I could walk through the market without guards, without the whisper of names that carried the weight of history. It was a freedom I had not known since my youth, a chance to be simply a man among men. Yet, the shadow of Rome never truly left me. It lingered in the corners of my mind, a silent presence that waited for the moment of weakness. The Romans had not forgotten, and they would not rest until every trace of my influence was erased from the earth. Live. Their agents moved through the courts of the East, whispering demands and making threats that echoed in the halls of power. I knew that my time was running out, that the net was closing in around me. The decision to leave was not made in a moment of panic, but with a calm and steady resolve that had guided me through so many storms. I packed my few belongings, the maps and scrolls that held the secrets of my campaigns, and prepared to face the end. The journey to my final refuge was short, but it felt like the last leg of a long and arduous voyage. I arrived at the small hilltop fortress where I would spend my last days, a place surrounded by steep cliffs and dense forests. The air here was cool and crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. I walked the perimeter of the walls, feeling the rough stone under my fingertips, a tangible connection to the world. I was about to leave. The view from the top was breathtaking, a vast expanse of green hills and blue sea stretching out to the horizon. It was a beautiful sight, one that made the pain of exile seem almost trivial in the face of such grandeur. I sat on a stone bench, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The light faded slowly, giving way to the first stars, small points of silver that twinkled in the darkening sky. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet acceptance of the path I had chosen. The legacy of my life would be debated by historians and strategists for centuries to come. Some would say my defeat strengthened Rome, allowing it to dominate the Mediterranean for centuries. Others would argue that my strategies influenced the development of military thought for generations after my death. The debate would remain lively and productive, ensuring that my name would never be forgotten in academic circles. The quiet study of my life would offer a peaceful reflection on the complexities of leadership and the costs of war. My legacy would rest not only in the records of battles, but also in the enduring fascination with my character. I represented a complex figure who embodied both the virtues and the vices of the ancient world. My life story would continue to inspire new generations of scholars, soldiers, and artists who sought to understand the human condition. The Capuan bust would remain silent witness to this enduring legacy, standing as a testament to a man who changed the course of history. The quiet contemplation of my life would allow one to appreciate the depth of my contributions to the annals of human endeavor. But these thoughts were for others, for the future that would unfold without me. My own journey was coming to an end, and I was ready to meet it with the same courage I had shown in the face of enemy armies. The poison was prepared, a small vial hidden within the folds of my robe. It was a simple solution to a complex problem, a way to ensure that I would not be paraded through the streets of Rome as a trophy. The taste of the liquid was bitter, but I swallowed it without hesitation, feeling the coldness spread through my veins. The pain was sharp at first, but it quickly gave way to a strange sense of lightness, as if the weight of the world was finally lifting. My vision blurred, and the sounds of the room faded into a soft hum. The ceiling above me seemed to stretch upward, dissolving into the darkness. I felt myself sinking, not into the earth, but into a vast and endless ocean of silence. The memories of my life played out before me. The silence of the final years was a different kind of quiet than the hush before a battle. It was not the held breath of an army waiting for the signal, but the slow settling of dust after a long march. I found myself in Libissa, a small town in Bithynia, far from the heat of the Italian plains or the cold peaks of the Alps. The air here tasted of salt from the nearby sea, a constant reminder of the water that once separated my world from Rome. I watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the stone walls of my dwelling. The days grew shorter, the light softer, and the weight of the past became a companion rather than an enemy. My body moved slower now, the joints stiff with the memory of snow and rain, but the mind remained clear. Live. The stories of those campaigns had already begun to travel, carried by merchants and soldiers who spoke of a general who crossed the impossible. They told tales of elephants trudging through ice, of men who laughed in the face of despair, of a strategy that turned the tides of empires. These words reached me in the quiet corners of the Eastern world, whispered in taverns and read in the halls of kings. I did not seek this fame, yet it found me like a shadow that refuses to leave. The Romans, my eternal enemies, could not erase the memory of what I had done. They wrote of me with fear in their voices, calling me a monster, a threat to their very existence. Their historians described my tactics with a mixture of dread and grudging respect, acknowledging a brilliance that nearly broke their republic. They feared the name Hannibal even centuries after the last battle was fought. The libraries of Alexandria once held scrolls detailing my movements, the ink still fresh on the papyrus. Scribes copied these accounts by the light of oil lamps, their reed pens scratching against the rough paper. The air in those rooms smelled of dried ink and old dust, a scent that persisted for generations. A single lamp cast a warm, flickering glow upon a map of the Mediterranean. The map showed the route taken by the Carthaginian forces with careful, deliberate lines. Blue ink marked the sea, while brown ink traced the mountains and the rivers. The texture of the parchment felt rough under the fingertips of the scholar who studied it. Shadows lengthened slowly across the floor as the sun began to set outside the walls. The silence of the room was broken only by the turning of a heavy page. This moment of stillness captured the essence of historical reflection on past conflicts. The map remained a testament to the great journeys undertaken by men and beasts alike. It stood as a silent witness to the strategies that changed the course of history. The lamp flame danced gently, casting long, wavering shadows against the stone walls. The scholar sat back and observed the intricate details of the drawn routes with quiet contemplation. The room felt timeless, holding the weight of centuries within its cool stone embrace. The reception of my life varied significantly across different cultures and time periods. Later generations viewed the campaigns as masterpieces of military art and strategic brilliance. The story of the crossing inspired countless writers and artists in the centuries that followed. My ability to lead men through impossible terrain became a legend in its own right. The narrative of the struggle became a standard case study for military planners in distant lands. Modern strategists still analyze the logistics of those ancient movements with great care. They study how a small force could challenge a vast empire and survive. The adaptability required to navigate hostile populations became a lesson in leadership that never faded. My story serves as a reminder that even the most powerful empires can be challenged by determined and innovative leaders. The memory of the exile and the final days evokes a sense of melancholy that underscores the fleeting nature of human achievement. Today, historians continue to debate the long-term impact of the actions on the course of Western civilization. Some argue that the defeat ultimately strengthened Rome, allowing it to dominate the Mediterranean for centuries. Others suggest that the strategies influenced the development of military thought for generations after the death. The debate remains lively and productive, ensuring that the name is never forgotten in academic circles. The quiet study of the life offers a peaceful reflection on the complexities of leadership and the costs of war. The legacy rests not only in the records of the live battles, but also in the enduring fascination with the character. The figure represents a complex person who embodied both the virtues and the vices of the ancient world. The life story continues to inspire new generations of scholars, soldiers, and artists who seek to understand the human condition. A small stone bust remains a silent witness to this enduring legacy, standing as a testament to a man who changed the course of history. The quiet contemplation of the life allows one to appreciate the depth of the contributions to the annals of human endeavor. The bust was discovered in Capua, a city that once witnessed the winter quarters during the Second Punic War. It serves as a tangible link to a figure who dominated the Mediterranean world for so many years. The sculpture remains one of the few known visual records of the Carthaginian general. It invites quiet contemplation of a life defined by ambition, resilience, and ultimate solitude. Live. The texture of the marble suggests the passage of time and the endurance of memory across centuries. Light falls softly across the stone features, highlighting the contours of a jawline that never yielded to defeat. The silence of the artifact speaks louder than the clamor of the armies once led. It rests in a museum today, far removed from the dust of the battlefields where once marched. The bust preserves the image of a man who changed the course of history through sheer will and tactical brilliance. The final days were spent in the shadow of this enduring image, a silent witness to the own mortality. The world moved on without me, yet the name remained etched in the annals of military history. The quiet town of Labissa held the remains until they were scattered by time and the elements. The death marked the end of an era for Carthage and the beginning of a new chapter for Rome. The general who had crossed the Alps with elephants now lay still in a foreign land. The story concluded not with a trumpet blast, but with a whisper in the wind of Bithynia. The legacy endured long after the physical form had returned to the earth. The strategic innovations continued to influence military thinkers for generations to come. The final years of the life were a testament to the unyielding spirit and refusal to submit. A free man in spirit even when the body was confined by circumstance and geography. The silence that followed the death was profound and absolute.